This is Power Hour with Gabriella Power.
Hello and welcome to Power Hour. I'm your host, Gabriella Power. Plenty coming up on the show, but before we dive in, I have to say, if you've woken up today with a sense of worry or regret, you might even be feeling a bit angry. You're not alone, because it's been revealed the AstraZeneca vaccine is being pulled worldwide months after admitting it can cause adverse side effects, according to The Telegraph. The company says the vaccine is no longer commercially viable. So if you're one of the millions of people who thought that you were doing the right thing by following the insane rules of the government in 2020 and 2021 and putting this vaccine in your body multiple times, chances are you might be pissed off. If you were living in Melbourne in Australia, one of the most lockdown cities in the entire world, like I was, not only were you told to never leave the house except for an hour a day, homeschool your children, and only go to work if you were deemed essential, you were forced to listen to this hero every day.
I've already talked about the extension of this lockdown a further 2 weeks from this Thursday, but we are strengthening the lockdown as well from 11:59 p.m. tonight. There will be a curfew on advice from the Chief Health Officer from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. each and every day.
It is so triggering. And in 2021, if you were living in Sydney, well, you weren't entitled to the same freedoms as everyone else if you didn't get the vaccine.
If you're not vaccinated, there will be a health order. It will be the law that if you're not vaccinated, you can't attend those venues that are on our roadmap. You can't go into a hospitality venue. You can't go to ticketed events unless you are vaccinated.
What these politicians did to us as a country was divisive. People were shut down for speaking their truth, shamed for daring to question the motives or extreme measures being taken by the government at the time, and the fear that was being drilled into us was happening on repeat. The mainstream media is also to blame here. Rarely were politicians being criticised or properly being held to account, because what we saw on the 6 p.m. news most nights were the lines of the politicians being repeated. And if you need reminding of how bad things were, Daniel Andrews was running a campaign to dob in your neighbour if you suspected they weren't at home.
There are literally hundreds of thousands of Victorians who've rung the police assistance line because they've had a suspicion that next door or across the road or down the street are doing the wrong thing. And they're doing the right thing and they're angry about it. And some people have sort of looked down their nose at that, dobbing in your neighbour. Well, no neighbour has the right to do the wrong thing. We've all got to see this through.
Can anyone seriously watch that now, believe that he was doing a good job? Not to mention the families that were torn apart, the loved ones who were separated from one another as premiers closed the borders for months at a time, the devastating economic pain that businesses suffered then and are still suffering now after being forced to shut their doors for so long, the adolescents who were robbed of some of the best years of their lives as they had their school formals taken away, proper celebrations after school taken away from them, a time in their life that they will never get back again, and a mental health crisis that has escalated as a result of all these decisions made by our premiers at the time. Now, if you were someone who wanted to wait and hold off getting the vaccine until we knew more about it, you were shamed. And some people lost their jobs over it. Others got the vaccine only because they felt that they had to and that they didn't have a choice. Well, now, pharmaceutical giant AstraZeneca is withdrawing its COVID-19 vaccines worldwide after admitting in a UK court it could cause a very rare but dangerous side effect of thrombosis with TTS, which involves blood clotting that can occur in the brain or the stomach and can cause long-term disability or death. To be clear, AstraZeneca says the vaccine is being withdrawn for commercial reasons and has nothing to do with its recent admission. The company says, as multiple variant COVID-19 vaccines have since been developed, there's a surplus of available updated vaccines. This has led to a decline in demand for Vaxzevria, which is no longer being manufactured or supplied. AstraZeneca has therefore taken the decision to initiate withdrawal of the marketing authorisations for Vaxzevria within Europe. AstraZeneca hasn't been available in Australia since March 2023, but when it was in use, almost 14 million doses were administered. The Australian Department of Health estimates the rate of TTS from AstraZeneca was about 2 per 100,000 aged 60 years or older, or about 2 to 3 per 100,000 in people under 60. Although AstraZeneca is being discontinued for commercial reasons, the news is a reminder of the freedoms that were taken away from us and the way people were treated by politicians as well as some members of society. I think we'd all agree that we never want to go back to that dark time of 2020 and 2021. But we need to remember that the fear that came from the top down, that was drilled into us and made many of us do crazy things like stock up on toilet paper, could be thrown back at us, but in a different way. And as a society, we need to learn the lessons from COVID, not to buy into the fear and not to be afraid to speak your truth and not to shame others for speaking theirs. In less than 6 months' time, Americans will head to the polls and decide who will be the next president of the United States. It's shaping up to be a rematch between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Donald Trump, of course, is facing 88 criminal charges in 4 cases. And Joe Biden, well, he's an elderly man with a poor memory, according to a special counsel report. To unpack what's going to be a big and bumpy ride, we're joined by Turning Point USA contributor and Trump 2024 campaign surrogate, Erin Elmore. Erin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Gabriella.
How's the Trump campaign faring amid all the legal battles that he's facing at the moment?
So I think this was a big week for the Trump campaign. So we saw in the Florida case, which was the Jack Smith document situation, that trial has been postponed indefinitely because there were allegations that Jack Smith basically forged documents that placed those slips. Remember the famous picture when the trial, actually not the trial, but when the case started percolating, those were not real. So that case basically off the table at this point. And now we see in the Georgia case that the appeal has been accepted to remove Fani Willis. So that kicks that case down the line even further. So I do believe this has been a big week for the Trump campaign. And I think that even if, God forbid, in New York, they find Donald Trump in violation of the gag order yet one more time and they try to throw him in jail, he will be our era's Nelson Mandela. He raises money every single time there's a new charge, a new allegation, a new threat to go to jail, a bigger bond against his properties. So I think what the Democrats thought was this was going to be a way to get rid of Donald Trump, but it has backfired absolutely and wholeheartedly.
Just recently, we've seen adult film star Stormy Daniels take the witness stand in the hush money trial against Donald Trump, admitting she hates the former US president and hopes that he goes to prison if he's convicted. Would you say the same thing? Is that actually helping Donald Trump's campaign?
You know, it shows that she's motivated, not only financially, because she has made money off of this, and she even said so publicly on multiple occasions, but it just shows you that these people aren't here for altruistic reasons and trying to make the country better. She has a personal vendetta. And if you look at the merits of the New York case, and I know it's very complicated, although I am an attorney, I'm no longer practicing, but what they were trying to get Donald Trump on would have been a slap on the wrist. It would have been a misdemeanor. And when they brought this case, no one wanted to bring it, by the way. The federal government, the DOJ, the FEC decided, we don't want to do this. Even Alvin Bragg himself did not want to bring this case. But after pressure from the Biden administration, let's face it, they brought this case. And all of the allegations in the complaint were saying underlying crime. We still don't know what that underlying crime is. So the long story made very short here is this case is also meritless. As Donald Trump said, this is a witch hunt. And I think all it's going to take is one juror. They don't even have to be a Trump fan or a Trump supporter to say, this doesn't smell right, because we know Alvin Bragg is a George Soros funded district attorney in New York City, where 60% of the felony cases have been reduced to misdemeanors. So you're reducing everyone else's case, but you're throwing the book at Donald Trump. Something isn't adding up. And I think any reasonable person would realize this is what you see in third world banana republic dictatorships, not in the United States of America.
Let's talk about Joe Biden, how he's been performing recently. He's warned of a growing threat of anti-Semitism during a keynote address at the US Holocaust Memorial Museum's annual event. Let's take a listen.
There is no place on any campus in America, any place in America, for anti-Semitism or hate speech or threats of violence of any kind.
Erin, what's your reaction when you listen to Joe Biden here?
Listen, he read words off of a teleprompter that were written by someone else. He realized that he was losing the support of the liberal Jews in most of the major cities in America. And what I would say to all of them and to all of your viewers and to you and to I is that actions speak louder than words. Although these words were written for him and he spoke boldly on behalf of the Jews, then why in the last 2 days, as he stopped sending the bombs that the Jewish state of Israel, our only ally in the Middle East, he did not send the munitions and bombs that were paid for by the state of Israel because he didn't like what they were doing in Rafah. So if you really care so much about the plight of the Jewish people and preserving the state of Israel, you should have sent those over. So yes, actions, yes, words, they don't line up. And when you see a disalignment there, you know he's only pandering because he knew he was losing the liberal Jews. Period. Hard stop.
And someone who is Jewish, can you talk to us about your journey to Judaism and also how it feels when you're listening to Joe Biden and some of the action or lack of action that he seems to be taking?
So, yeah, I converted to Judaism for my husband 12 years ago so we could have our son be born Jewish. I took a spiritual journey. I took a difficult journey. I took a tough journey to become a Jew. And what we're seeing now across the country, in the United States, on college campuses, the anti-Semitism is absolutely sickening. But what I would say to Hollywood, the Met Gala was disrupted by these Hamas protesters. Colleges are being disrupted. Graduations are being destroyed. I would ask the left what they think they didn't do here, because they created all of this. They created DEI. Our children are learning DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, as young as kindergarten, a system of oppressor and oppressed. And because the Jews have been largely successful, they are considered to be the oppressor, which is insane if you think about what has happened during the Holocaust and how many Jewish lives were destroyed, 6 million Jews. So basically, the left has created this animal, and now they are shaking their heads and wondering why it's happening. And it's actually quite sickening. They're supporting all of this hatred. And by the way, none of this is free speech. This is not free speech when you are harming other people, when you are threatening other people, when you're disrupting the lives of other people. Of course, we all have the right to peacefully protest. The speech that we should protect is the speech we hate the most and fear the most. This has gone beyond free speech. And when Joe Biden, just a few days ago, he was talking very vapidly saying anti-Semitic and anti-Islam. We haven't seen anti-Islam or Islamophobia on college campuses. It's all been directed towards the Jews. So I think the only reason why he's speaking up now is because he feels like he is losing that Jewish liberal vote.
Yeah, and it was just wild to see some of the pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel protesters march through Manhattan in New York on Monday while the Met Gala was unfolding. And we saw some images of the American flag being burned. We saw these protesters blocking traffic, setting off flares. How would you describe leadership? How has Donald Trump really responded to the issue of really stamping out anti-Semitism compared to Joe Biden?
Well, if you go with actions speak louder than words, Donald Trump moved the embassy in Jerusalem, and how many presidents before him promised to do that, both Democrat and Republican? He's the one that did that. He brokered the Abraham Accords, ushering in peace to the Middle East. So his actions speak so much louder than that of Joe Biden, who just bloviates and makes bold statements but has no action to back it up. Donald Trump's daughter, just like me, Ivanka, converted. He's got Orthodox Jewish grandchildren. He has skin in this game and he is invested. And when people try to say he's the one that is a Nazi or an anti-Semite, it's actually sickening and disgusting, because what we are seeing on all of these college campuses or all of these ridiculous riots or insurrections, because that's really what they are, those are basically on the plate of Joe Biden. And we really need to realize and wake up as a nation and see what's going on.
Look, let's move on to another issue. One of the top issues for voters in America right now is the crisis at the southern border. Now, Donald Trump has pledged to undertake the biggest deportation campaign in American history if he's re-elected next year. He'll be doing this, targeting millions of undocumented immigrants nationwide. Erin, can he really deport 20 million migrants? How's he going to do it?
It's really hard, because I saw a Gallup poll from February that said in all 50 states, the biggest issue is immigration. And now Ohio is a border state. Missouri is a border state. Every state has now become a border state because these people are being transported at the behest of the Biden administration to all 50 states. There is fentanyl pouring in through the southern border because of Joe Biden, and that's killing our mothers, sisters, brothers, sons, children. So I really think that we have to have a wake-up call and realize what's causing this problem. Honestly, I don't know if we can unring this bell. I think the damage done under Joe Biden in these 3 years is catastrophic and extremely damaging to our country. So, although I love President Trump's idea of deporting all of these people, when you think about it and you sit in bed, it keeps you up at night. How are we going to be able to do this? But I do think that no one has been vetted coming through the southern border. That's why we're seeing young women being raped, children being killed. It's really catastrophic and a nightmare situation. So I do think that maybe it's starting with people that commit crimes. You hear these stories. This person came through the border 5 times. It's making sure those people cannot re-enter our country. And I just think that the blood of this nation is on Joe Biden's hands.
And have you seen that issue become more front and centre for Americans? Have you really seen the change over the past few years?
I mean, absolutely. So I live in a small town in Florida that is a beach community, and I live on the beach. Not once, but twice in my 4-year tenure here have boats washed up right in front of my house at the same spot. And you know that is not an accident. And the issue with that is these people are coming here illegally, but then they run on foot. They jump in front of your car. They flee. You have to lock your doors. You become afraid for your life. This is impacting small towns just like the one I live in. And I go back to the fentanyl crisis. I think this is impacting every American, right, left, center, every socioeconomic status. I see when you go to random airports in Arizona or in Chicago, these people are in the airports. You see in these shelters in Chicago that people are getting all these diseases that we thought have been eradicated for many years. I do believe this is no longer a southern border issue. And you just point to these small examples that when you add them up, they become massive. And that's why the Gallup poll is right. This is a 50-state issue, the most important issue, probably other than the economy.
Can you describe to us what that's like when you actually see boats arriving in your small town?
I mean, it's terrifying. So you hear helicopters on your head, you see police on your street, you see fires, you know, it's a terrifying situation. And honestly, it's a town called Jupiter, Florida. It's idyllic. It's super small. It's a great place to raise children, and you become terrified. You don't know where these people have gone to. You don't know if they're going to break into your home. You don't know if they are armed. And I think that this is a fear that is not unique to me. I feel even more upset and sorry for those people that live in these towns in Texas and Arizona and California that see these things happening every single day. And you got to realize something else. The NGOs, the non-government organizations, they are ushering this in. They are allowing this to happen. They are thinking it's a good idea. And you got to realize there are human lives and problems at stake. And we've also heard national security advisors say, we saw what happened on October 7th in Israel, right? So we've let a bunch of people in this country completely unvetted. We don't know what they're going to do. We don't know where they're from. We remember 9/11. My husband is a 9/11 survivor. How can we in good faith say that we are not at risk for a terrorist attack when we don't even know who's coming through our border?
Living in Australia, it's just wild to see some of the vision that I am seeing on X and speaking to people like yourself about the crisis that is unfolding in America. No wonder it is becoming more and more of a pressing issue for American voters. So we'll see how this plays out. Moving on, let's talk about RFK, because he's challenging former President Donald Trump to a debate. He's an independent candidate and he's certainly not going down without a fight. He's posted this on X. He's written, "I'd like to make you an offer. We're both going to be speaking at the upcoming Libertarian Convention on May 24 and 25. It's perfect neutral territory for you and me to have a debate where you can defend your record for your wavering supporters. You yourself have said you're not afraid to debate me as long as my poll numbers are decent. Well, they are. In fact, I'm the only presidential candidate in history who has polled ahead of both major party candidates in head-to-head races. So let's meet in a couple of weeks and show the American public that at least 2 of the major candidates aren't afraid to debate one another." Erin, how likely is it that we're going to see this?
I have absolutely no idea, but if I were Donald Trump, who is the front runner, who's already been president, I would say RFK, God bless. I'm out. I will say this, Nicole Shanahan, who is RFK's running mate, I think everyone should be paying attention to who she is, because she is a typical left-wing Democrat, married to Sergey Brin, supported all the Soros DA candidates in California. She is nothing different than a Nancy Pelosi, you know, an AOC. She is as left-wing as they get. So initially, JFK seems really appealing. I get it for about 35 seconds. He's anti-vax, he's anti-establishment. But then you hear what he's saying. He says that children should be allowed to change their gender. He said that affirmative action, the Supreme Court's decision, was wrong. So I think once you peel back the layers of the onion, RFK is not really this special candidate. I love that we have a third party candidate, but he's on basically one state's ballot at this point. I think he's more juice than squeeze at this point. Actually, the other way around, more squeeze than juice at this point, because he's not really a part of the conversation. Yes, he's getting a lot of publicity, but he's not someone that's going to take votes away from Donald Trump, but perhaps he will from Joe Biden.
Okay, let's talk about Prince Harry. He's in the UK for the Invictus Games, and his own father won't even be making time to see him. Last month, Donald Trump threatened that he might deport Prince Harry if it's found out that he did in fact lie on his visa application about his past drug use. How likely is it that Donald Trump would actually pursue this?
You know, I think that the standards, just as the liberals say right now, no one is above the law, right? Isn't that what they say when they talk about Donald Trump? Then let's apply our standards equally in this country. And I do believe that Prince Harry has become such a hateable figure, so as his wife in America, because he's just riddled with supremacy and superiority, and they just haven't been additive to our nation at all. And if he lied in any capacity on any sort of federal documentation, put that shoe on the other foot. And if it were Donald Trump or Eric Trump or Barron Trump or Don, how would they be treated? As the liberals say, no one is above the law.
Turning Point USA contributor and Trump 2024 campaign surrogate Erin Elmore, so great to speak with you. Thank you so much for coming on Power Hour.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Let's turn our attention to what's going on in Central America, because El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele is going viral. Last week, the president surprised his entire cabinet by calling them together to announce that they're under investigation for corruption. In a video posted to X, he asks the Attorney General, the only person present who is not part of his government's executive branch, to look into allegations of bribery involving all members of the cabinet.
Como pueden ver ustedes todos, los que estamos aquí reunidos son parte del Ejecutivo, del órgano ejecutivo, que es del cual yo estoy encargado, a excepción de una persona. Es el fiscal general que está aquí, él no es del Ejecutivo. Y está acá por una razón bien sencilla. Y es porque le quiero pedir en público de que investiguemos a todos los que están acá.
Joining us for more on this is policy analyst on Latin America at the Cato Institute, Daniel Raisbeck. Daniel, thank you for joining us once again on Power Hour. It's pretty rare that you see this in politics. And before we get your reaction to the video, can you tell us about who President Nayib Bukele is?
Right. Well, what you see in the video is Bukele launching a, quote, war against corruption. I think it's a continuation of his war against crime. El Salvador has been, during the last few decades, one of the most violent countries in Latin America and, in fact, in the world. And this has, of course, changed with Bukele, who came to power around 5 years ago. And he has imposed very drastic measures against criminal gangs. So over 70,000 suspects are now in a very high security prison. And this has made El Salvador from one of the most violent countries in the world to one of the least violent in the region. On the other hand, this has been done by violating all types of due process. And Bukele has done several moves that have really gone against the rule of law. In 2020, for instance, he entered as president Congress with the army in order to force legislators to approve a loan to his government. So there's already several instances of Bukele really installing the early stages of an autocratic regime. He's tremendously popular. He was just reelected, even though there wasn't supposed to be a re-election according to the Salvadoran constitution, which he changed. So on the one hand, he's tremendously popular. He has definitely solved the issue of crime for the time being. On the other hand, he has used very questionable methods, in my opinion, but he remains popular. And in the video, you saw him now trying to wage a war against corruption. And critics will say that it's not entirely transparent either, because, for instance, his attorney general is not as independent as it seems. And there has already been at least one profile arrest recently. One of his commissioners or top advisors But as I mentioned, critics maintain that in order to have a war against corruption, the first thing you have to have is division of powers and an independent judiciary, which in El Salvador apparently you no longer have.
It's pretty interesting that there's already been one high-profile arrest. Do you see more being made?
Probably, especially if Bukele wants to portray himself not only as the victor in the war against crime, but also in the war against corruption. But again, I think in a certain sense, Bukele has won because there hasn't been very many times when the president of El Salvador is discussed outside of Central America or in the region, let alone across the Anglo-speaking world. On the other hand, as I mentioned, his tactics have been very heavy-handed, and we've seen it in the region, in Latin America, so many times where presidents are elected democratically and according to the rules and according to the Constitution, and they change the Constitution in order to stay in power. So we've seen it in Venezuela, in Ecuador, in so many countries, in Nicaragua, just to say in Central America. So the question is how long Bukele will stay. Until now, he's able to stay for 5 more years, but there's already talk of extending that for another 5 years. He is tremendously popular, and his party controls the vast majority of Congress, where there is no longer any type of valid opposition. So the question is to what extent there can be any rules or checks on his power. And of course, power corrupts. And this is something that we're looking at closely in Central America.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? As you say, his party, New Ideas, now holds 90% of the seats, granting substantial influence over legislative decisions, including the possible alterations to the Constitution for his re-election. How likely is it that this will go ahead?
I think it is likely. It looks likely at this point. It doesn't look like he has any intention to just step down at the end of this term, even though it just started. Personally, I would hope that he does, in order to have some type of rule of law in El Salvador, even though, admittedly, the system as it stood before failed completely in order to solve the main problem, which was criminality, which Bukele has indeed really cracked down on crime. And that's why I think you see his tremendous levels of popularity. The question is how long you can maintain that, because, again, there have been numerous leaders in the region who have had, even with somewhat similar policies, very high levels of popularity. But it's only a matter of time until you detect all types of abuses. So there are all types of organizations that have already denounced the lack of habeas corpus, for instance, and people being rounded in just for being suspects and being in jail now for several years. So that's something that you have to look at as well, not only the figures in terms of crime, but also how they're going about bringing that into effect.
Let's turn our attention to Argentina. US tech billionaire Elon Musk has met with President Javier Milei, and Elon Musk has recommended investing in Argentina. President Javier Milei is also encouraging investors to consider investing in his country. Let's take a listen.
Hemos puesto hombres en la Luna y ahora miramos a Marte. Y lo hemos hecho gracias a la ambición, la creatividad y al optimismo de hombres como ustedes, que se asocian entre sí en pos de la búsqueda de la propia felicidad. No tenemos que perder la fe en esa ambición primal que los humanos tenemos como guía. Somos una especie de exploradores, de creadores, de inventores, no de burócratas. Y es el empresario aventurero, no el burócrata de escritorio, la clase de hombre que encarna en el presente esta cualidad atemporal del espíritu humano. Por eso no quiero dejar de celebrar el esfuerzo de mi amigo Elon Musk por pisar Marte, porque entendemos que la exploración espacial está a la altura de nuestro destino como especie exploradora, demasiado grande para estar confinados a este planeta.
And as we just heard, Javier Milei goes on to praise Elon Musk. They appear to have struck up quite the friendship.
Yes, they've already met several times, and I think Milei's speech and the content of the clip you just shared is completely commendable. It's very refreshing indeed to see a leader really defending free markets and the role of entrepreneurs and business people in society. And I think that's why people like Elon Musk are also optimistic about investing in Argentina. What I'm concerned about is maybe a gap between rhetoric and reality. You see in Argentina, for instance, they haven't gotten rid, the Milei government hasn't got rid of exchange rate controls. They still controlling certain prices in the economy. For instance, we saw this with private health insurance providers. And they haven't dollarized the economy. So what we're seeing is you are seeing a sharp drop in inflation, but that is coinciding with a sharp drop also in industrial activity. So over 20% in March alone, according to very recent figures. So you are seeing a drop in inflation, but that's also coinciding with a contraction in the economy. And I think that if Milei had dollarized, as he promised at the beginning, instead of waiting or postponing it, you could have a very similar effect in terms of reducing inflation, but not having that in a contractionary phase, but rather have more of an expansion at this moment. So at least for me, I'm hoping that dollarization takes place sooner rather than later.
As you say, there is a bit of a gap between reality and what's being said, but what impact does it have, or do you expect it will have on Argentina, that you have people like Elon Musk saying, invest in this country?
Well, you're already seeing it in the markets. The bond market has rallied significantly, especially medium to shorter term bonds in terms of their maturity. Also, the stock market has rallied. And it's not only Elon Musk, Stanley Druckenmiller, the great investor, is also recently, I think yesterday, said that he had even bought 5 or so of the most liquid Argentine shares that are available on the US market. So I think there's a lot of credibility because he is going after the deficit. He is trying to reduce the debt, which is the main problem of Argentina, which is a serial defaulter. But I think also that a lot more needs to be done in terms of changing the monetary regime completely, as Milei promised to do during the campaign. Remember, he promised to dollarize the economy and shut down the central bank, and we haven't really seen any signs of that until now.
I have to ask you about this Brazilian UFC fighter. I'm not going to pretend that I watch or even enjoy UFC, but this clip is going viral because UFC fighter Renato Moicano has had this to say about his favourite economist.
I love America. I love the Constitution. I love the First Amendment. I want to carry enough guns. I love property. And let me tell you something. If you care about your country, read Ludwig von Mises and the 6 lessons of the Austrian Economic School, mother.
Daniel, can you explain to us why this is going viral? What's your assessment?
Right, well, I think this shows that even beyond Argentina, in Brazil also in the last decade or so, there has been a tremendous rise in interest in libertarian ideas. So the fighter you were showing was recommending the work of Ludwig von Mises, one of the stalwarts of the Austrian School of Economics. So in both Brazil and in Argentina, and being as important as they are in Latin America, there's been a great interest, especially in Argentina with Milei. But in Brazil, I think even before that, there's growth in the movement and in interest by student groups. And there's been several articles trying to explain or to analyze the sudden influence of figures who a few months ago might have seemed obscure, like Ludwig von Mises or Friedrich von Hayek. And I think it's terrific news from a libertarian perspective to have these magnificent figures of libertarian thought and libertarian history figure prominently now in mainstream media debate. So I think it's definitely something to celebrate.
Daniel Raisbeck, policy analyst on Latin America at the Cato Institute. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Gabriela. It's a pleasure.
Prince Harry has returned to the UK to celebrate the 10th anniversary of his signature Invictus Games Foundation, but the Duke of Sussex will not be meeting his father, King Charles, during the trip. Riley Sullivan is a reporter here at skynews.com.au, and he's always across the latest headlines from the royal family. Riley, great to be with you. I can't believe it. It's pretty big news that the King will not be meeting Prince Harry while he's in the UK. What's Buckingham Palace had to say?
Yeah, look, it's a little bit sad, isn't it? I mean, after all of this build-up for weeks and weeks, speculation that this would be the big moment, Charles would, see his son, possibly that Harry would even see the Prince and Princess of Wales. And yeah, I mean, nothing. I mean, the King has been very busy. He's had a full week of engagements and he made it clear he didn't have time in the schedule to see his son Harry, probably adding a little bit of salt to the wound. He did RSVP yes to another event next week for Prince William, but obviously he wasn't at Harry's Invictus Games Cathedral service earlier today. So yeah, it's kind of sad actually.
It shows you just how deep those wounds really are between the two, right?
Absolutely. I mean, this I guess estrangement has gone on now for over 4 years, and as time goes on, and the King is obviously battling cancer and focusing on his own health and his reign. It's not looking good, is it?
I think that's why there was speculation that the King would make time for Prince Harry because he's battling cancer, but he's made his decision.
He has. I mean, yeah, it is. It's a sad one, but look, Harry seemed to be in high spirits. He looked quite cheery in the photos and the vision that we've seen at the service earlier today. So, yeah, onward and upwards, I guess.
Harry will depart London and head straight to Nigeria with his wife Meghan Markle for their unofficial tour. Why are some royal experts warning that this trip could actually backfire?
I mean, this trip is interesting. It's an unofficial royal tour. They're not there on the behalf of the British government. They're there at the invitation of the Nigerian government. Some people think that this is a bit risky. When you're not there on behalf of say, the British Home Office, you're kind of at the whims of your host. And there is concerns that maybe Harry and Meghan could be, they like to control their image, but this could backfire and they're not going to have control. There was also other reports this week that this is all part of Harry and Meghan's plan and they're actually going to try and use the trip to destabilise Charles in Nigeria. After all, Nigeria is part of the Commonwealth. But this trip has drawn some mixed reactions. Another criticism that we heard was that Harry and Meghan have accepted this invitation and presumably the costs of security and travel will be covered by Nigeria. And some people think, well, Harry and Meghan are multi-millionaires. Yeah. Why are they travelling over to Nigeria and expecting, the Nigerian government to cost it? I mean, unfortunately, this is a country where 2/3 of Nigerians are living on less than a couple dollars a day. I don't know how this trip's going to pan out, to be honest.
Yeah, you can really understand the criticism, can't you?
Absolutely.
This week we also heard reports that Princess Catherine is considering giving her sister an official role when she becomes queen. What role could Pippa Middleton play in the future royal family?
Right, well, I found this very interesting personally. Allegedly, Kate is already looking at the future. I mean, unfortunately, I think with the circumstances that's believable. I think that, she probably is looking at the next 10, 20 years of her life and her possible role as queen. And apparently Pippa Middleton is part of those plans. She is very close with her sister. They're a very close-knit family, the Middletons. And allegedly Kate is already thinking of making Pippa a lady-in-waiting. This is a very long-held tradition of having a lady-in-waiting. It's almost like a personal assistant, but a kind of a right-hand woman, I guess. I will say that Camilla doesn't have a lady-in-waiting. She has opted to have some royal assistants instead. But yeah, it would be interesting for Pippa. She's quite an interesting character herself. When she originally kind of burst onto the public stage at the wedding of Kate and William in 2011, there was a lot of buzz about Pippa. She was obviously the maid of honour at the wedding. And at first it seemed like she was enjoying the attention. She did a few product deals, a la Meghan Markle. She was sort of out there, I guess, in the media. But then allegedly William kind of had a word to her and kind of, gently advised her to sort of focus more on charity and maybe retreat a bit. And I kind of think that might have been the plan all along, that, that William and Kate have always understood that Pippa and the Middleton family would have a role in the future monarchy, and they wanted to sort of lock that down. And now it seems like, she's really in position. I mean, she married an aristocrat herself in 2017. She's very much part of that aristocratic circle. So I think it's quite believable that Pippa will be a lady-in-waiting.
And I think a lot of people would love to see that. I think there's a lot of people that love Pippa. We know that Kate Middleton has now been revealed as the most popular royal. She's overtaken her husband. So, look, we'll wait and see. But that's... think some good news or some good speculation.
Definitely.
The monarchy has just celebrated 1 year since the coronation of King Charles and Queen Camilla. What's the British public's opinion of the new King and Queen 1 year in?
Look, I think it's been a rollercoaster year, obviously, with the King's health, but overall, I think that the British public have really warmed to not only King Charles but Queen Camilla. They're both significantly up in the polls versus a year ago before the coronation. Camilla in particular, you've got to remember, in the 1990s, she was one of the most sort of controversial people in Britain. So to go from that, from a royal mistress to literally, the Queen of England and someone who is pretty widely respected at this point, I mean, it's a remarkable turnaround and a credit to her. I think that she's shown her strength, throughout her husband's illness.
I completely agree with you. Finally, Harry's London trip has raised his current visa situation in the US. It's raised alarms, I suppose, about that. We know that Harry has not yet achieved permanent residency or citizenship in the US, but why might Harry have to ask his father for help with his next visa?
Right, well, this was an interesting development. So, as you said, Harry lives in the United States. He's lived there now for about 4 years, but he does not have permanent residency or citizenship. If he were to take those steps of attaining citizenship, he'd likely have to give up his prince title. And realistically, there's two possible visas that Harry could be on. He could be on, I think it's called an O1 visa, which is like what celebrities use. It's very common for famous people to use that to live in the US. A lot of Aussie celebrities are on that visa. I think Hugh Jackman, for example. The other option would be that Harry is possibly currently on a diplomatic visa. Now, that visa lasts for 5 years, which would mean that if he's had it since 2020, it's looking to expire sometime next year. That diplomatic visa actually requires the approval of King Charles to be renewed. So in a very roundabout way, Harry might actually have to contact his father and ask for help with this. So, quite an ironic situation to be in for Prince Harry.
Isn't it, when his father's not meeting with him?
No, but yeah, he might be getting a letter soon.
Well, we'll wait and see. Riley Sullivan, thank you so much for joining us once again on Power Hour.
Thanks for having me.
Speak with you.
Great to see you.
That is Power Hour. Thank you for your company. We'll see you next week. Make sure you subscribe to Sky News Australia on YouTube.